Sean Rogers and Steve Evo looking ahead to a fantastic weekend where Liverpool don't play, and then a Monday night where Liverpool do play against Crystal Palace, the game that has been unbelievably long awaited at this stage of proceedings. On Tour Live coming up, you've got Ewan McTeer on Barcelona, Paul Gorst on the manager in the press conference today, which is also where we'll start as well, and we'll sum it all up by looking directly at the Palace game, getting some predictions and going from there. But I thought that the manager's press conference may be interesting today, and it most definitely was. And Dan Morgan, he was spiky, to say the least. I mean, I obviously love all that. He doesn't like a daft question. He doesn't like it, I think, when they try to throw him a ball so they can put him in a compilation of what other managers think. And certainly that's what they were trying to do about 30 years of the Premier League. If there's a way you want to put him in a bad mood, do that sort of thing. And my God, they achieved it.
It was spiky, wasn't it? I wonder whether it was the 9:30 thing. I wonder whether he's a bit of a late starter.
I'll be honest, he chose the time.
I don't know whether I can get on board with anyone in the world being mean to Alan Irvine, to be honest. He's as me and you know, Neil, from our City Talk days, he's probably one of the nicest fellas you can ever meet. So
lovely man, great tan. I mean, at the minute he must be
tremendous.
Absolutely resplendent in this heat.
Tremendous man. So it was a bit like sort of getting asked which one of your parents is the favourite. To be honest, but yeah, he was. I mean, he was looking resplendent in his white and grey jacket. I was all in on that, but I think there's a culmination of things here. I think the time between games isn't helping, in the sense that there's clear frustration around the results at Fulham, and I think that knowing this team the way we do, they'll have wanted to put that right straight away.
Yeah,
you know, I think if they could have played on Sunday, they would have done. And I think, you know, it's amazing, isn't it, in football, just how much wins clear the mindsets of everyone, really. And I think it just could have done with everyone to have something midweek that would have constituted some form of win to keep the Wolves from the door, if you like, from Jude Bellingham chat, etc. So I think he picks up on that. You know, as much as he says he doesn't, and as much as he says it doesn't impact him, he's clearly irritated by some of the narrative around Liverpool's projected need for a midfielder, and I think he sees that as an insult to his squad and his boys and his players who've amassed 90 points over a league season on 3 separate occasions now. So, you know, I as ever stand with him on that, and as I ever stand with him on the fact that, you know, if he thinks what's in front of him is good enough, then it is, because, you know, he's been a better judge of character than any of us have over the last 7 years, and I think he'll continue to do so.
He finds himself, Sean. By the way, if you are listening to this as a podcast and not seeing it as a video, as a live, Sean has come as Onslow, one for the teenagers there.
I'd say Onslow like Club Tropicana.
Yeah, Club Tropicana.
Onslow's like a white vest. I think I'm sort of Onslow in Wham.
Yeah, you're absolutely funky as anything. Wham also one for the teenagers, and also the topic of the show. He finds himself, Sean. It's he goes out of his way.
He finds himself in a better position than I do right now.
Well, yes, different solutions to the injury. But what I think is interesting is he goes out of his way to say if there was a player that they wanted, it would already be done. And I think that's sort of been his message, I think, now for a month, around the idea of one more, a midfielder, etc. They clearly were very interested in Tchouaméni. It doesn't happen. And then he likes what he's got. And I think, you know, at some point we've got to make our peace with that. I'm using we in a very broad sense there, as Dan says. You know, I think he doesn't feel they're missing a specific type of midfielder. He goes out of his way to say it. That's where he is. That's the way the manager he is at the moment. That's the way he views his players. And I think that if people disagree with that, that's all right. It's all right to disagree with that, but you're then disagreeing with him. And as long as you're comfortable disagreeing with him, then that's a fair place to be. But that's what's happening here, isn't it, with midfield?
Yeah, completely. And people are assuming that if he brings, let's say, one in, well, firstly, you'd have had to do more business than that anyway, in terms of outgoings. And secondly, if you'd have brought one in, why is everyone assuming that they would just hit the ground running anyway in terms of form? And then you've got fitness, when the thing that everyone forgets about the context of our midfield is our midfield is probably the worst midfield to play in the league, if not Europe, because of what we ask them to do from a system point of view. So we've seen how much it takes people to get used to that system. And you only have to look at the Gini Wijnaldum example, if you like, of what we got him doing, and it worked for us and worked for him, and how difficult that is to factor in both when if they're elsewhere. Like if you watch Gini Wijnaldum at PSG, you might not necessarily say he's the midfielder that we would need and at Newcastle, like we had a completely different idea for what he wants to do. And the other thing for Klopp is if you're going to bring someone in, it needs to be an absolute worldie. Also because of the culture of the dressing room, because Elliott, Curtis Jones, maybe even Naby Keita, plays 19 games last year, like you've referenced before, Neil. Like, wasn't 35, it was 19, which suggests to me with his availability, the manager's not as sure from a consistent level. I think he knows that he can hit the highs, but from a I know what I'm getting point of view, I don't think he's sure. So if you were to bring other people in, I think he's got to make a decision on those players earlier. And I genuinely don't think he wants to. I think he's got next summer in mind to say, I want to see how these players progress for another year. And then I will actually really know for certain which ones of them I can keep. And we know how many we then need. And I think Liverpool are working towards doing 2 or 3 next year. If they could have brought one of them forward, they obviously would. But if you can't, you can't. Like, it's not even a discussion, is it?
Well, what he's trying to say, I think, Steve, is that it isn't, he doesn't see it as a discussion. He says that they've cut that discussion off now. They've cut it short at the start of the press conference because they couldn't get what they wanted, and they've decided that they're going to move on with where they are. He says, he goes out of his way to say that he's not stubborn, and I'm fascinated by this because I think some people, firstly, simultaneously think that he is stubborn, but also at times think that he's too nice, and I'm not quite sure how you square that particular circle. But he ends up in a position where I think he feels like he couldn't have been clearer on. He doesn't believe they're missing a specific type of midfielder on the one hand, and on the other hand, that everyone is ready to make the next step of their development. And I think it was for me, it just seemed like a real, not quite a blast, but yet again, him sort of reinforcing what he was saying at the start of July, which is that he likes these footballers. And in the end, like every manager, he'll live and die by his players, but he's very, very clear, even off the back of last weekend against Fulham, that these are the players that he wants, that he is happy with these players, and he feels as though these players will do what he needs them to do.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know how Klopp works now, then, following Liverpool probably isn't for yourself, you know what I mean? It's like, he backs his players 100%. These are the players he brought in. These are the players he's bringing through from the under-23s, and he has complete faith in the players he's got in his squad. So, he's shown in the past that he's just not willing to compromise on any transfer targets that are going to come in, whether that be because they're going to come in and take an unnecessary space in the squad, and once everyone else is fit, they're not going to get much game time, and you got someone moping around the changing room who's not going to play. And also, you're going to, as you said before, you're going to hinder the pathways of Harvey Elliott's go. Carvalho's come in, Curtis Jones, and anyone else who he thinks has got a really good chance. He deserves. I see it on Twitter before, which was a really good shout, and he said, he said something about if we hadn't bought a right back if we bought another right back in when Trent Alexander-Arnold came in instead of and gave out Trent to go, would he be the player that he is today? This is the kind of person that he is. He wants to give these young players a chance, and he's determined to make sure their pathway isn't blocked any way, shape, or form, and to given the opportunity to become a Liverpool first team player.
It's interesting where he Steve, for me, he goes out of his way again to say 8 or 9 are in with a chance. He also, when he references the Fulham game, says, he loved Elliott, liked Milner's performance, mentions Henderson at a 6. He mentions that Keita's back as well. I think everyone feels there's loads of games to go around, or is quite happy to sort of make those games disappear. If we play 4-3-3 every game, there's 153 appearances if we make the Champions League final in the league and in the Premier League. They actually get eaten up quite quickly. Last season, they got eaten up in a round where Naby Keita only got 19, where, you can sort of go down the list. Oxlade-Chamberlain doesn't get as many as he might have hoped at the start of the season. Jones doesn't get as many as he'd like. Elliott got injured and was out for the bulk of the season and never quite got himself right. The point here is that very quickly, those games do disappear quicker than we think. And whilst I think we'd like the security blanket of one more, I think I would still plump on the side of if they could pull something out the bag, given what's likely to happen with Oxlade-Chamberlain and Milner at the very least next summer. I wouldn't be against it, but I'd feel like whatever lad you were bringing in, there's every chance you bring him in and he'd only get 15 starts.
Exactly that. People talk about Nunes from Sporting Lisbon, bringing him in. He's playing regular football over there. He's developing. He's going to play 30, 40 games for them and really come on as a footballer. You bring him into Liverpool, and then all of a sudden, as you say, he could play 15 games once Thiago's back fit, once Henderson and Fabinho are firing all cylinders. Then he's not going to get anywhere near the game time that he should do. That is going to hamper his development. So, he's determined to work with the tools of what he's got. And as you say, as I said before, no compromising on targets, and then they obviously have a strategic plan of when they want to bring these players in. They obviously like Bellingham, but they don't want to bring him in too early again, because you've got the difficult conversations to have with someone like Jordan Henderson or someone like Thiago. Listen, you're not going to play as much now because we paid £110 million for this lad, and he needs to get game time. So. I think he's doing it the right way. Yeah, in an ideal world, we'd all have another worldie to come in, because we know, we are going to have injuries, and there are some players in that midfield who aren't quite as reliable as others. So, just in case that happens, but you can't bring someone in on a whim just in case something else happens further down the line. It's not fair not playing in, I suppose.
I thought his response to the attitude questions was interesting, Dan, where firstly he said he wasn't quite sure in his English whether he quite used the right word, which I thought was interesting. But then the other thing that he did was he kept all the way through the press conference when he was referring to Fulham, he would almost physically gesture to his head, like he'd come back around to gesturing to his head again over and over, as though he felt, there was an alertness thing. He refers to people waking up literally at different times. He went out of his way to say he feels as though football's very different when you've got 50 starts behind you. He couldn't be more emphatic there. But I was intrigued by the extent to which he was, whilst he was saying attitude might not have been quite right, he was very, very on top of the idea of, but it was something in people's heads that he felt as though wasn't quite where he wanted it to be.
Yeah, there is a small nuance to that. And, even us with English as a first language would find it difficult to almost find the difference between attitude in one sense and attitude in another. So, I think the point he wants to get across was that attitude in the dressing room in general has never been, and in his mind probably will never be questioned whilst he's at Liverpool with this particular bunch, because we know how he's talked about them in the past. We know what he thinks of them in general. But for him, there was just something in and around the build up to that game which meant that they went out there and they weren't where they should have been. And I think it was interesting to say that, I think he made the point to say we've had a lot of time to reflect and analyse and go over different things. That won't just be tactical. They'll have been looking at when they arrived at Fulham, how much kit they had, what time they got up, what they had for the breakfast. All of those things will have been taken into account, as well as the team meetings, as well as the analysis on the game itself. So I think he looked to me confident in that particular phrase of the press conference, where he described it, that he'd found what he thought was the root of it. And Sean and I were speaking off air before about the interesting comment about the pitch being blocked in the centre of in central areas and not just by the players, he said quite flippantly, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure what he referenced there. Sean said he thought it might be the referee. I don't know. I'm not too sure. But in general, I think he is mindful. He's more and more mindful of when instances of English not being his first language and his combined need to get a point across is something that he needs to reiterate and clear up. And I think for that reason, I think the last thing he'd wanted to do was to have it come across that he was questioning the collective mindset of a dressing room, because I think that sort of conversation now is reserved for the likes of Manchester United. That type of thing is your Super Sunday chat for 2 hours after the R4 game a week. Let them have that. That's not something he wants to bring into Liverpool, because it's completely not present, and you can't get to where we've got by having that collective problem. I think it will just be more in the minutiae of what actually could we have done different to prepare for that game, whether that be a 12:30, whether it be anything else. Going forward. On the other point, just very quickly, I think he was at his most spiky when he had the point made to him about slow starts last season as well, and was very adamant that you couldn't compare the two. And to a degree, I completely take his point about having 50 games in the tank and having to just go blow for blow in a title race. But we did a little bit of analysis for the review show on the Anfield Wrap, and we can see that there's a bit of a trend there, and he won't want to admit that. He won't want to come out. The last thing he want to do is come out to a press conference and say, yeah, we think this is a bit of a problem. But I think behind the scenes, again, if they're looking at a more mid to long term focus on solutions, I think the last thing they'll want to do is carry on with the trend where they go into games and they're conceding early and they're fighting from a point of being -1.
I think on that, Sean, correlation is not causation. Let's be absolutely crystal clear from a Liverpool point of view. And I think even within that, the manager, there'd be fairness if he said, listen, the way in which you're talking about this run of starts, Madrid is different to Fulham. Fulham is different to Southampton. Southampton is different to Villa. These are all different things that happen in game state, different things that happen within the games in that run. But it is fair to put the point to him. I think that there's no getting away from that as far as I'm concerned. Liverpool have been starting these games a little bit behind. Liverpool have been starting these games perhaps a little bit slower than he might like. He can make the point that there's 55 games in the tank, and it's very different going to Aston Villa midweek off the back of an intense game when you've then, versus Fulham when there hasn't been one. And that's maybe important that he makes that point internally as well. There's no hiding places here, no excuses. But as far as I'm concerned, it is a valid question to put to him. It is one he does need to think about an answer for, because we can't keep going 1-0 down.
Yeah, I mean, it stood out because it was probably the only decent question in the whole press conference. And in addition to that, look, it is a thing. I think it's potentially structurally as much as it is anything else that they do in preparation for the game. But quite rightly, Klopp cannot answer that question any differently. Under no circumstances can he say, do you know what, I think you're right. We've been working over the last 9 games because we've spotted this and everything we try isn't working. No one's going to come out and say that. And I'd rather look foolish as a man, in his shoes. You've got to be prepared to look foolish and say things you don't necessarily believe in for the greater good. And like Dan said, there's enough clues in there to suggest that they have been looking at this clearly and they know that it's a thing. One of the biggest things, he seems to have really lost his frustration. He's been really frustrated and lost his temper in the game when he said, even when I watched it back, he knew. If you listen to his press conference, he says the first pass we knock out, we do badly. The second one gets blocked, and I'm thinking to myself, that's the trigger. That's where we wake up and we change what we do. And I think the problem with this Liverpool, there's 2 problems I think this Liverpool team really need to address quickly. And one of them is that they start games on the basis that they're playing it in peak performance mode. Like they're on a tightrope. There's not much room, for protection otherwise. And the other thing that they do is they believe that it's going to change any second. They don't think that we need maybe 10 minutes to play our way back in, perhaps. They just think it's going to change. And I think that's what he's referencing in the press conference, that once it's gone wrong once the build-up that he wants has gone wrong twice, that's where we do need to go to plan B. And the other thing, if you look, whisper it quietly, but nowhere near enough clean sheets. And we don't look structurally as tight as we should be. We have the best collection of goalkeepers and defenders, certainly in this country and arguably across Europe. We have some of the hardest working and most tactically aware midfielders as well. Now, the problem is we've got to chase down 90, 95, potentially 100 points. And therefore, I'm not questioning for 1 minute the strategy that they have to do that. What I am questioning, though, is I do think there are times in the games where they need to be a bit more pessimistic, and structurally, I think we need to be a little bit more solid. Because if you go, what he says about fatigue last year, I don't think makes any sense. Because if you've done and that's why I don't think he's telling the truth in the press conference, not for the first or last time. When you've got a fatigue squad, it's even more important to start fast. Because as Bob Paisley used to say, you can move down the gears, you ain't moving up them, and you're certainly not moving up them when you're fatigued. So the message would have been get out fast and win this game. The last thing we need is to be chasing this game down fatigue, because all we're going to do is be more fatigued next time around. So yeah, I think it's a number of factors there. I'd like to see Liverpool being a bit more structurally solid. And like I say, I'd like to see us play our way into games in a bit less risky, if you will.
Okay, this is TAW Live. We're going to build up to the game against Crystal Palace coming up after you've heard, if you listen to this as a podcast, John Gibbons speak to Ewan McTeer and Paul Gorst. So more to come on Crystal Palace, more to come from Sean, from Dan and from Steve. But we will be back after Ewan McTeer and Paul Gorst. Weren't they good? Ewan and Paul there, an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much to John as well for doing that. Steve, Palace then last season, they were a lot of fun. Vieira was inherently likeable. They were even fun, I felt, against Arsenal, the first Premier League game of the season. Took time out to watch it, enjoyed watching it. But it is worth saying they started exceptionally slowly against Arsenal, which was something they did a lot last season. And, if there ever is a game where you'd like to see Anfield up for it, but also the players come out quick, they could get a lot of change out of Crystal Palace from what I saw in the first half an hour against Arsenal. Let's
hope so. Yeah, I expect us to be bang up for, especially after the kind of dressing down publicly that Jurgen gave the squad. Really, it's not very often he does that, and question attitude is not something that he does very often. So, I expect us to be bang up for it. I mean, Palace last season, but then they played some decent stuff from what I remember, but they just drew a couple of games here and there where they should have won it. It took them a while to get going, but once they get going into the stride, they played some really good stuff. Yeah, they didn't look too dissimilar last season. Obviously, they lost Conor Gallagher, who was a bit of a driving force for them from midfield last season, who's kind of pivotal to what they did, really. He led a decent press for them and contributed a lot of goals and assists and played really well. So he'll be a loss for them, but they have a really young squad. Patrick Vieira, I like him as a manager. He comes across really well. Still got a bit of snide about him, which I love, and I can see that in his team as well, really. So hopefully Monday. I wish it was Saturday. Hopefully Monday we can find out the blocks and we catch them a bit cold again, because I thought, as you said, you were a little bit back-footed against Arsenal, really, and made Arsenal look pretty good in that first half an hour. But then they grew into the game and caused some real problems. So hopefully we can put the game to bed early on Monday night.
It's nothing new, them starting slow down. Over the course of the calendar year, the expected goals against for them is 18.5. 11.1 of them has come in the first half. Just to extrapolate that out and explain it, most games start cagey and open up as they wear on. So Newcastle, for instance, are in total 21.8 expected goals over the same period, but only 8.7 in the first half. Brighton, 24.5 expected goals against in the same period, only 10.5 in the first half. But it's worse than that for Palace when I looked at the numbers. Of good chances they've given away, XG chances rated at better than 0.2. They've given away 22 this calendar year in the Premier League. 17 of them have come in the first half and only 5 in the second half. That really is a side that it's not starting quickly under any stretch of the imagination. You saw the same thing against Arsenal. I don't think the pre-season quite as smoothly as they'd like. If there ever was a game for Liverpool to get in amongst them and to have a really strong shout early in that match, it is this one.
Yeah, I think so too. I think just touching on press conference, I've just had a little look back at Vieira's from today, and it's, if you want to look at it, it's very negative in terms of a game plan point of view. If you're a Palace fan looking at it, or indeed any fan looking at it, you would say that he's definitely going to set up a team to come here and defend it. I mean, I think he uses the word defend more than once. He uses the game against City last year, the win they had against them, as a blueprint. But he basically says that, it's about organisation, about being disciplined. Going to Anfield and defending for 90 minutes will be tough, he says. So he's almost preempting that as a game plan for him. And I think in large part because of him, they overperformed last season. And I think they were really astute with getting the likes of Gallagher in. But I think they aren't as I don't think they have as much tactical versatility as they did last season. I thought it was interesting they played, it was a variant of a 4-2-3-1 against Arsenal. Whereas I think what worked best for them last season was then when they were looking at a lot more like a 4-3-3. And you think about that game against us last year, they played really well for an hour, and Benteke plays really well for an hour at Anfield. In that game particularly, he has a really good first half, and they cause us some problems until we get the breakthrough. So I think if we're taking what they did against Arsenal, in terms of how they set up as something to go off for us, I think Liverpool can really get at them in central areas. I don't think it'll be like Fulham in that sense. I don't think there'll be a ton of confidence in themselves in having Decore and Schlupp playing as your two. I think Schlupp, he's almost a converted winger, isn't he? I think he has tendencies that he can go missing from those particular areas, and he can be exploited in those particular areas. I think they can be pulled apart in the way that we do. I think it's more about how we start the game, and I think we'll have a point to prove in that. I think the manager now is, again, given everything we've spoke about, he's aware of it. He'll know the team have got to start quick. It's Anfield. It's the first home game of the season. There's a ton of variables, but I think that there's the added fillip in there that if Liverpool do start quick, then there's every chance they'll get more results from it, given the Palace look to be a little slower.
It's come through last sort of hour or so, Sean. Matip sat out the back end of training. It was one anyway. I mean, I had it already on the agenda I sent you earlier today, Gomez or Matip. I felt I was up for him starting Gomez, to be quite honest with you, because of the way they like to play that big switch from right to left. That it isn't just Anderson that does, though Anderson does do it best, looking to get that ball over the top. I felt as though Gomez might well be better suited to that from a Liverpool point of view anyway. So it's not the end of the world if Matip's got to miss this one out as a precaution. But the last thing we could do with is another injury, obviously.
Completely. I mean, obviously don't know any severity on that. It could just be, as you say, precaution. I would have gone Gomez anyway, not just for Palace. I think it would. I'd want to, if I was in Klopp's shoes, I'd want to know exactly what nick Gomez is in ahead of United. If you could guarantee that Gomez was in good nick and form, I'd probably start him at United. Across the pitch, I think Gomez as well for the moving of the ball and stuff as well. Matip does it in a different way, but I think Gomez is underrated in the speed of which and quality that he can bring the ball out from the back with, more so with his passing than carrying it like Matip. I think if I was Jurgen, I'd be looking to send a message out with my team selection though, not just about starting fast, but also in terms of just the wider squad culture as well. It was interesting in his press conference that he did reference that, all the players have to bring the best. It's not about, someone nicking someone's shirt or someone losing the shirt. For me, you have to start Milner and Elliott. I think Milner and Elliott bring complete enthusiasm, intensity.
Would you start Milner? I still think Milner from the bench. I would start Elliott, but Milner from the bench is the way I'd be thinking still. And I understand the argument. Would you go for Milner in this one then?
Yeah, I would go Henderson, Milner. I would go Henderson, Milner, Elliott, and then obviously you just have to delete every social media app for the rest of the week. But I would go Henderson, Milner, Elliott, because I think they bring the intensity that you want. They finished the game against Fulham really well. With this bigger gap, rhythm's hard enough anyway. It sends a message out to the dressing room that if you come off the bench and deliver and play well and help us out when we need digging a result out and you do it, there's a chance that you get back in. There's a bit more carrot for the squad in that sense. I think Keita, I'd rather bring him off the bench and play his way in. I'd rather Fabinho come on and shut the game down when legs start to tire. So they would be my first two go-to subs. But I'd want Liverpool right at it from the off. And I think Elliott and Milner, maybe for different reasons, you can't be certain on the quality of what they bring. But you can guarantee that is the most intense midfield that could start fast. And I don't think Palace will be able to live with that intensity. And then you've got the technical quality of Fabinho and Keita and potentially Carvalho to bring on later in the game if you need it, and to take advantage of that slow start in Palace. I just think you want that pace and intensity. And for me, I think there's also a meritocracy element to this, that maybe they deserve to start as well.
Okay. Steve, how do you feel about that? In my head, I'm all right with Fabinho, Keita and Elliott. I would just be starting Elliott first and foremost. I think it's time for that to happen. I can see the argument for Henderson in terms of, firstly, in being able to cover to the right a little bit more, secondly, in moving the ball a little bit quicker. But this one, maybe I will go with Fabinho. I think they'll feel like Keita's quite as close to this. What would you do, and what do you think that they'll do?
I've toed and fro, to be honest with you. I think I'd start with Fabinho back there. I think he'll want to. He doesn't usually have two bad games in the bounce, and I think he'll want to come out a full 10 days really now to sort of find some more juice in his legs, and I think I'd start him there. I'd like to, obviously, I think Javier is going to start, and then obviously if that means he starts on the right of midfield, then Jordan Henderson doesn't usually fit in as well on that left hand side really. So. I think it'll be one of Milner or Keita, to be honest with you. But I think Fabinho definitely comes in again. And I think, obviously, I'm leaning towards Milner. I think Milner's, as Sean said, if you're going on earning your place in the side, I think he's shown enough in the last game. I think he really does. He looks sharp, he looks fit, and even if he's got a shelf life of just an hour in that game, I think he's going to, as Sean said, bring an intensity and a good pace to the game that will hopefully give us the fast start that we spoke about before.
In attack, what would you do, Steve? Because I think that there's obvious reasons to look at Darwin at this point. His record looks great. The manager though praises Firmino today in there as well. Diaz, I thought, had a good first half against Fulham. Second half, maybe not quite as much. What would you do? And again, what do you think he'd do?
I mean, I thought his praise of Firmino was a little bit short. I mean, we said we didn't try and find him enough, but I thought at times that we did find him, his distribution, his ball retention was pretty poor. But then he was just one of many that day. It was pretty poor against Fulham, as I said before. So for me, I think you've got to start Núñez for me now. I think he's causing all kinds of problems for every defence he comes up against, different types of defences, different types of setups. So for me, if we're speaking again about fast starts and wanting to come bursting out the blocks and cause them all kinds of problems and possibly put the game to bed as early as possible, then for me, Darwin comes in at the front with Diaz and Mo either side of him, I think. So That's the three I think he'll play. I think that's the thing I'd like to see him play anyway.
What would you like to see him do there, Sean, in attack? Would you like him to go with, as Steve says, what I think people would want to see him do at this point, or do you think there is a chance, given the fact that he'll want to smother Palace, that it might not be that three?
I think it will be that three, because I think, again, similar to Gomez in a way, I think he'd want to see what Nunes is like starting. Look, he'll want to win against Palace, let's be clear, but I do think it would be handy to get an idea of where Nunes is with an eye on United. Because if he has any doubts whatsoever about fitting in, more so tactically, I'm not talking about his threat going forwards. I think they want to see how he's fitting in tactically with things, because I wouldn't surprise any of us, I don't think, if he could hypothetically play the same team against United that he played last year, with the exception of Jota being injured. He goes Bobby and Mo that day. In the midfielders, Keita, Milner, Henderson.
Milner goes off early, though, for Jones.
Yeah, if it was the same sort of structure at United, you'd maybe make an argument that you go with that again, different manager and things. Maybe you'll have second half. But in terms of this, I think you have to start Nunes and then take a view, in the gap you've got where that leaves you afterwards. And then you've got Bobby off the bench. Obviously, you've got Carvalho off the bench. We haven't seen it yet. We've always got the option. If they think Nunes has only got 60 in him, they've always got the option of moving Salah central. I suspect that their go-to thing would be either Elliott right or maybe Diaz right. We see Diaz do a bit of that at Villa away, and he's much more effective drifting in off the left-hand side, of course. But it is an option for them to move in right and play Carvalho off the left if they start with Elliott and feel that they might only have 60, 70 out of him as well.
Do you see that, Dan? Do you see the idea that they may well start with Darwin and then look to rejig it, or do you think that Firmino might get the home start?
Yeah, no, I see Nunes start, and I think he's knocked on the door too much for him not to now. And I think I've got a feeling Henderson doesn't start this one. I think where he will be a little bit cautious, despite all the midfield chat, is that he knows Henderson can play both 6 and 8. So I think he'll be one that he won't want to take too many risks with. If he's the next one to sort of fall foul of a 4 to 6 week knock and layoff, then I think that will be a little bit where internally they are starting to sort of hit a bit of panic stations, because I think there's going to be a plan this season for Henderson to do a lot at 6. So I think Nunes will start instead of Firmino. I think it'll be Fabinho, and I'm with Sean. I'd go Milner and Elliott as well, either side of Fabinho for this. And I think they're just not a real sort of point to take as a comparative, but I just had a little look at Burnley last season. Obviously, it's quite similar if you drop Elliott in there, but also, we bring Thiago and Firmino on around 60, 70 in that game, and there's just tons of control then from there on in. So, I think controlling games and sort of winning games from 60 on is what Liverpool need to do, but I think they need to do it a little bit differently. I think it needs to be from a point of already being fully in control of that game. So I think Henderson from the bench makes a lot of sense for me for this one in terms of coming on and giving impetus either 6 or 8 last 30.
Okay. Dan, do you think we're going to win the game?
Yeah, I do. I think, but you ask me for a prediction, I'll just go for a very comfortable 2-0.
Sean?
Yes, Elliott bangs first goal.
Marvellous. Love it. Love the big shout, Steve.
Yeah, I'm expecting a good response after a pretty disappointing performance and result from last week, so I'm going 3-0.
Excellent stuff indeed. Liverpool shaping up against Crystal Palace. It is Monday night. Download the Anfield Wrap app. Everything you need in terms of build-up beyond this show. Everything that you need for the full weekend as well in the Premier League. Wonderful Friday show done yesterday. Really, really enjoyed it. Everything that you want. If you download that app, you'll be able to see it all there. You'll be able to see all the build-up. You'll also be able to look ahead to Monday. There'll be Sunday best on Sunday too. Monday itself. Loads of post-match stuff. I can't wait to be back at Anfield for all the nonsense around transfers, for all the top Reds nonsense, for all of that bollocks. The whole thing only works if we all stand together. See you later.